Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timescope, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto is a ninja with secrets. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 28, Weaponized Rumor. Sasuke couldn't shake the vague feeling of unease, even as he followed his older brother through the village and back into the Uchiha district. Itachi had to elbow him a few times so that he could give polite responses to the other Uchiha that greeted them as they passed by. Dimly he noted that he was getting a little more attention than usual. Normally Itachi would get all the praise and their relatives would mention him as an afterthought, if they remembered to at all, probably due to his participation in the trials. It was only when he arrived home that he was completely distracted from worrying about why Kakashi and his brother were worried. Before he even reached the front steps, the door slid open and his mother hurried out to give him a hug. She smelled like cooking rice, her flowery perfume, and home. "Welcome home," she smiled, greeting him as if he'd been out of the village on a mission instead of simply undergoing a test. "How did it go?" "Good," Sasuke answered uncertainly. His mother gave him an odd look before looking to Itachi. "How did he do?" "He did well, from what I understand," Itachi answered. "Where is father?" "He should be in his office," Mikoto replied. Itachi turned to stare in the general direction of the military police headquarters for a minute before heading inside. Sasuke and his mother followed him in. While their mother returned to the kitchen to complete whatever she'd been cooking, Sasuke trailed after his older brother as Itachi headed into the tea room. "Did you want to tell father about it first?" Sasuke asked quietly, resisting the impulse to finger his shoulder. "I was simply wondering where he was," Itachi shrugged. "It's probably better to warn mother first." "All right," Sasuke mumbled and settled in at the low table. For a while all was quiet. Itachi looked to be deep in thought and Sasuke distracted himself with tracing the wood grain of the tabletop with his index finger. The younger Uchiha brother went back to thinking about the evil mark bitten into his skin, the rogue half-demon who'd put it there, and who else besides Orochimaru would be out to get him because of the curse mark. "Why do you two look so glum?" their mother asked, entering the room with a pitcher of juice and some glasses. "What's wrong?" Sasuke fidgeted, not sure of what to say as he wasn't entirely sure of all of what was going on. "Orochimaru was in the forest of death," Itachi said. Mikoto spilled the juice as she was pouring it and almost dropped the pitcher. He didn't touch Sasuke though, right?" "Sasuke was cursed," Itachi replied. She gasped and almost dropped the glass pitcher in her rush to search Sasuke for the proof of Itachi's words. When her fingertips found the invisible spot on Sasuke's shoulder and ran chakra through it to see it, she choked on a sob and clutched him to her chest. The younger Uchiha boy felt a fresh wave of panic at his mother's anguish. "Mom, the Umbu sealed it," Sasuke gulped. "And Kakashi said he'd get me training time with Anko. I know this curse mark is supposed to be really awful, but it's not like it's going to kill me or turn me in a werewolf." "Itachi," Mikoto sniffled. "Go find your father. Maybe we can keep this from the clan. No one else has to know about it." "Do you really think that father will turn a blind eye to this?" Itachi asked dubiously. "And even if he did, eventually the secret will find its way out." Their mother cried a little and kept on hugging Sasuke. The boy didn't fight his mother's embrace, hoping it would comfort her. He'd never admit that he needed the comfort, too. Itachi just stood by and waited. "Mom," Sasuke mumbled, unable to keep quiet any longer, "what's wrong?" "Nothing," she coughed, trying to gather her composure. "Nothing. Don't worry about it, Sasuke. We'll figure something out." "Don't worry about what?" Sasuke frowned. "What are you afraid is going to happen?" Mikoto chewed at her lip in hesitation. She took a deep breath and wiped away the few tears she'd shed. And then she loosened her grip on Sasuke and leaned back to look him in the eye. "Well, Sasuke." Their front door banged open and Uchiha Uroshi, the plump woman who ran the clan bakery, stumbled inside. It was a huge breach of manners to simply barge into another's home, even if they were of the same clan. The fact that Uroshi had done so made Sasuke tense and anxious. Uroshi-san, Mikoto frowned, what? Mikoto-sama. Uroshi panted, wringing her hands in distress. Have you heard? Heard what? Mikoto asked. Some people are saying that Fugaku-sama, Shisui-san, and 2 other military policemen were attacked by Umbu. Uroshi said, wide-eyed. They might even have been killed. What? Mikoto almost whispered, turning white. That can't be right, Sasuke thought, numb. That would never happen. The Umbu only attack enemies of the village, and father only acts in the defense of the village. It has to be some awful rumor. A lie. You haven't heard. Uroshi swallowed hard. Do you think that the rest of the clan could be next? Don't jump to such conclusions, Uroshi-san, Itachi warned. I will look into this myself. Go back to your bakery and do your best to relax. The middle-aged baker woman hesitated, then bowed deeply to them and hurried off. There was a minute of silence, and then Itachi stood and headed for the door. Their mother hurriedly caught his arm before he exited. Be careful, she requested. I will, Itachi promised. Try to keep everyone calm while I'm gone. He glanced at Sasuke with a serious expression. Look after mother for me. Sasuke nodded wordlessly. And then Itachi was gone, sliding shut the door that Uroshi had slammed open in her startling entry. What's going on? Sasuke wondered as he watched his mother go back to the kitchen, pale and trembling. There's no way that father was attacked by Umbu. There's just no way. Father only does what's right. No one can be punished for that. Kashoku fought the urge to smile as he watched a section of the Uchiha district from the roof of an apartment building outside the Uchiha's walls. He was too far and too high up to see much detail without pulling out binoculars, which would make it far too obvious that he was spying on them, but he could still see them running around like insects from a kicked anthill. It had been well worth it informing them of what had happened to 4 of their number, the clan head included. He'd had a feeling that the Uchiha would go after the boy as soon as possible, so as soon as the Forest of Death section of the trials was over he kept an eye on Fugaku. When he noticed the man and some cohorts getting into position he trailed them at a safe distance, careful to shake the Umbu shadow that he'd noticed he'd picked up that morning beforehand. Employing a camouflage jutsu, he found a good spot and settled in to watch. Even when things went sour and sideways, he did nothing but watch. No matter what happened, he could use the events to his advantage while keeping his hands clean. And so, while more Umbunin swarmed in to take custody of the Uchiha, he slipped away to visit the Uchiha district and fed them enough information to take his claims seriously, and be very, very worried. Scurry you little Uchiha ants, the brown fox in human form silently gloated. Fear for your lives and mistrust your village. In a few minutes, I'll be visiting the Hyuga and the Inyazuka and I'll tell them all about how some Uchiha committed an unprovoked and baseless attack on an innocent little genin. And then I'll tell the civilians something completely different. He shook his head and reluctantly turned his gaze away from the Uchiha neighborhood. And after that I'll look up this Konoha source Yakushi Kabuto and see what other more subtle little cracks I can widen in this village. It'll be so much fun. It was the irritating electronic beeping that eventually woke him up. When he finally pried his eyes open, he found himself staring up at fluorescent lights and ceiling tiles instead of his bedroom ceiling. He lay there, dazedly wondering where the heck he was and how the heck he'd gotten there. Kiba, are you awake? The boy blinked and lifted his head off the pillow just enough to see Akamaru curled up by his side in the bed. Where are we? He croaked, feeling oddly battered and sore. You are in the hospital, Shino answered from a plastic chair on the other side of the bed. No, really. Kiba snorted, annoyed that he hadn't noticed that his teammate was also in the room. When did I get here? 2 hours ago, Shino replied. Kiba dragged a hand over his face, dimly taking note that he'd broken his nose somehow, trying to shake the cobwebs from his head. So, we washed out of the trials. Huh. Akamaru whined, cocking his head in confusion. No, Shino said, adjusting his shades. We successfully navigated the Forest of Death and cleared that phase of the trials. However, the phase immediately following was an individual competition, and only I shall be advancing to the final phase. Don't you remember? No, Kiba muttered, unnerved. I don't remember making it to the tower. Shino hummed thoughtfully. Are you feeling better now that that icky black stuff is out of you? Akamaru asked. Icky black stuff? Kiba repeated. What are you talking about? In the individual tournament, you were pitted against Naruto, Shino supplied. After he defeated you, you vomited some strange black substance that attempted to attack him. You. Kiba shuddered. And then, that loser beat me? No way. Me and Akamaru totally would have beaten his butt. But you didn't let me fight with you, Akamaru whimpered, looking horribly sad. What? Kiba yelped. Why would I do that? I don't know, Akamaru sighed. But Naruto did beat you. His face got funny and he started smelling funny and then he started copying the Inuzuka taijutsu. No way. Kiba growled. There's no way that clown could copy the four-legged beast style. He appeared to, Shino shrugged, unbothered by his ability to only understand Kiba's half of the conversation. In the beginning of your match, it looked like you would triumph. However, Naruto employed some mysterious ability that allowed him to mimic you almost perfectly, and match you blow for blow. Impossible. He must have cheated somehow. Kiba protested, struggling up into a sitting position. As soon as I get out of here, me and Akamaru are gonna find that loser and get a rematch. And we'll win together. Right. Akamaru agreed with great enthusiasm. The hospital room door slid open and Kiba's older sister strolled in. What's with all the yelling? Nothing, Kiba muttered, eyeing his older sibling nervously. Right, Hana drawled, giving him a suspicious look. Well, it's good to see you up, little bro. From what the doctors were telling me, you're pretty lucky. Huh. Kiba blinked dumbly. What they told me, she said, half sitting at the end of his hospital bed, was that a couple of other genin had the same unknown substance in their bodies, and not many of them got off as easy as you have. One died in the forest of death before the test even ended, another died in the hospital when they discovered that she was infected and they tried to remove it, and at least one more suffered permanent damage to their intestines before it could be extracted. You, however, should recover completely with a few days rest. You sure they had the same thing as I did? Kiba squeaked, freaked out. Yeah, they were sure, Hana nodded. How did you come into contact with that mysterious stuff anyway? I dunno, Kiba shrugged nervously. Kiba and I smelled something funny so we went to find it and when I was sneaking up from the other side it must have gotten Kiba because after that his breath smelled bad and he felt sick. Akamaru babbled, eager to be helpful. You smelled something funny? Hana asked dryly. Kiba squirmed. She frowned at him, got up, walked closer, and smacked the back of his head. Don't ever do something stupid like that again. I won't, Kiba promised, rubbing the new sore spot on his skull. I totally won't. Good, Hana grunted. And thank that friend of yours, Naruto. If he hadn't hit you hard enough to make you puke that nasty stuff up, you might have ended up worse off. Oh, okay, Kiba sighed, wilting under his sister's heavy look. Satisfied, his sister glanced over at Shino curiously. Say, where's the girl from your team? She had to report to her father, Shino informed them. Her match did not go well. Who did she fight? Kiba asked. Neji, the bug user answered grimly. Ouch, the Inuzuka boy hissed. How bad did he beat her up? He didn't have to lay a hand on her, Shino said. He defeated her through words of intimidation alone. Good thing I was out of it, then, Kiba grunted. Otherwise I would have punched that jerk in the face. I don't see how anybody could be mean to Hinata. She's so harmless, it'd be like hurting a newborn puppy. Naruto almost did that for you, the Aburame told him. Had his sensei not held him back, it looked like he would have tried to do Neji bodily harm. What? Kiba scowled. First I have to thank the guy for saving my butt and now I owe him for standing up for Hinata? Naruto called him a bully, Akamaru yipped. I don't think he likes bullies very much. Have I met this Naruto kid before? Hana wondered. He's one of your friends, Kiba. He. No way. Some nurse out in the hallway gasped loudly. Some Uchiha attacked some Umbunin. Kiba blinked. Say what? Hinata slowly made her way to her room, confused and numb. Her report to her father had gone just as badly as she had expected. But the consequences of her loss left her mind whirling. Your sensei has offered several times to allow you to live with her, her father had said only a few minutes before. And now I find I must take her up on her offer at last. I must wash my hands of you. Hanabi is now heir of the Hyuga. Go gather your belongings and leave within the hour. Return only 3 times a week to continue your training in the gentle fist style. She had long expected to be disinherited, so that was no surprise. Nor was Hanabi becoming the new clan heir a shock. Yet her father had not mentioned any time or date of when she would be sealed into the branch family. So, was she not going to receive the caged bird seal? That was unheard of. Whenever the heir of the clan was decided, any other siblings would be sealed into the branch family. There were never any exceptions. Perhaps he will decide on a date to perform the sealing later, Hinata thought as she mechanically gathered her clothing, weapons, and few personal possessions together. Yes, that must be it. Father is too disappointed in me to determine a date now. It was ironic that she looked forward to be sealed when many of her relatives dreaded it. But once she became one of the branch Hyuga, her mediocrity would be much less of a disgrace to the clan than it was as a head Hyuga. No one would expect anything great from her and she could fade into the comforting shadows of obscurity with all the crushing weight of expectation shed from her shoulders. To her, the branch family was something like heaven. She didn't mind that she would be expected to serve her grandfather, father, and sister without question or complaint. She did that already. She wasn't bothered that she would have to protect and perhaps even have to die for the head Hyuga. She loved her baby sister, and respected her elders, and would gladly be a branch Hyuga for them. And, maybe when I am part of the branch family, Nejina-san will be able to let go of his hurt, she hoped as she finished her packing. It was probably a forlorn hope, but she still clung to it tightly. She felt horrible for what had happened to his father, and for her inadvertent role in it. If only she hadn't been so weak and useless then, if only she'd been able to avoid being kidnapped or strong enough to escape on her own. Hinata sighed sadly and gathered up her 2 bags. She slipped out of the back of her father's house and made her way to the back streets of the Hyuga district. She'd already shamed her family enough, she refused to shame them further by leaving through the main ways so that the whole village would see her exile. Hopefully I won't be too much of a burden on Kurenye-sensei, she worried as she walked. She loved her sensei almost like a second mother. Kurenai was intelligent and patient, forgiving and strong. Hinata wished to be like her, though she knew it was impossible. Still, when her sensei encouraged her, Hinata did her best to be less of a disappointment. The girl paused a few blocks from the Hyuga district and adjusted her grips on her bags when a civilian man and woman walking in another direction passed by her. I'm not making this up. The man protested. I heard that an Uchiha got bitten by a werewolf inside the village. Quit trying to freak me out, the woman scowled. There's no way that a werewolf could get inside the village walls. And no Uchiha would ever get bitten. They're far too skilled and powerful. But I heard a shinobi talking about. Hinata watched them over her shoulder as they hurried out of her hearing range. What? Itachi tried to be patient as he waited to be admitted to the Hokage's office. He'd been waiting for nearly an hour and the longer it took, the more he worried that some Uchiha would do something stupid out of panic. But, if there was any sort of truth to what Uroshi-san had said, and with his father's recent behavior, he feared that there was, it was best if he was on his best behavior to assure the Hokage that the Uchiha clan was still loyal. I hope you haven't done anything unforgivable, father. Finally the secretary gave him the signal that it was his turn and Itachi tried not to rush as he left his seat in the waiting area and headed for the office. He knocked politely on the door and entered after the Hokage gave him permission to enter. And then he walked inside and bowed to the old man standing by the panorama of office windows. Hokage-sama, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. The Hokage looked tired. His lined face looked older than it normally did and his shoulders looked bowed. It really made Itachi wonder about what his father might have done. Thank you for waiting your turn, the old man replied. What can I do for you, Itachi? There are rumors in the Uchiha district that Umbu attacked several prominent members of the clan, Itachi said. I wish to know if there is any truth to those rumors. The Hokage grimaced like he'd bitten into a lemon. I was hoping that it would take longer for them to be missed, and several days until Umbu involvement was suspected. What has my father done, if I may ask? Itachi inquired with dread. Uchiha Fugaku, Uchiha Shisui, Uchiha Tekka, and Uchiha Yashiro were involved in an unsanctioned attempt to eliminate the genin Naruto. An Umbu assigned to look after the boy in the lull between the preliminary tournament and final phase of the trials interrupted them with force. Regrettably, Yashiro was killed and Shisui was gravely, perhaps fatally, injured, and Fugaku and Tekka both suffered minor wounds. All survivors are being held in an Umbu prison, pending on their punishments, which will be determined after it is clear whether or not Naruto will survive. Itachi felt a terrible cold weight settle over him as he absorbed this information. And then he thought of the troubled but not terribly threatening blonde boy with the odd-fashioned sense. Father, I know that you do what you feel is right, but how can you justify this? Chapter 29, The Fine Line. He was lost somewhere in a misty place. He couldn't decide if he was floating or standing. He couldn't really see anything or feel anything, but sometimes he'd catch muffled snatches of sound from far, far away. Only silver. This damage. Poisoned. Badly poisoned. Do what we can. What he heard didn't bother him much. It was like the meaning behind the words failed to register. All that mattered was that he was far away from the agony that had driven him to this strange place of nothingness. He stayed there, unaware of time or place. Sometimes he'd hear things. Not responding well. Whispered voices. Made it through the night. Muddled words. Wished Tsunade-sama was still around. But it all slid in one ear and out the other, forgotten just as quickly as he heard it. And sometimes he had the sensation of moving. When he moved down, he would start to feel again. He'd feel the heaviness of his body, the burning throb of his wounds, the ache of his bones, the nausea churning up his throat. Every time it drove him back up, away, to where it didn't feel bad anymore. And then, one time, he started to move up. It was like heavy chains were starting to loosen. He went higher and higher, bit by bit, and stopped hearing shreds of things and feeling unpleasant sensations. He glided upwards like a leaf on the breeze. A 10-year-old boy looked up at the grand front gates, decorated with swirly leaf patterns as the cart he was riding in rattled up to it and dully wondered what sort of place this Konoha Gakure no Sato was and how long it would take before the available foster families here had all kicked him out so that he had to move on to the next place. He spiraled higher like a crane riding a thermal. A 7-year-old sulked at the top of the stairs as he watched his foster family sit in the family room, watching TV together, all happy and perfect, but he wasn't one of them and he was only staying there to rack up their good karma points and surely in a few weeks he'd be gone someplace else, probably somewhere worse, and they would have long forgotten all about him because he was just another foster kid like all the rest. He soared ever higher like a hunting eagle. A 5-year-old sobbed into a pillow that wasn't his in a room that wasn't his in a house that wasn't his surrounded by a family that he didn't belong to and for the first time in his life his mother didn't come to soothe him and make everything better, and she wouldn't come to him ever again because his grandfather had gotten rid of him and the only way he could get his mother back was if he became stronger than his whole extended family, and saved her from them. He sailed high above the clouds at heights no bird could. A 3-year-old child stumbled away from his tormentors with his little hands tied behind his back and tin cans on strings tied to his tail as the much older children threw pebbles at his feet to keep him running so that the cans rattled and bounced and pulled and smacked him on the back and he was so scared his mother came and cut off the cans and shouted at the naughty older children as she untied his hands and when they ran home to their mothers his mother gathered him up in her arms and rocked him until he stopped crying. And then he reached the stars, seeking the sense of home that he'd always felt in his mother's arms. He opened his eyes and found himself in a meadow full of blooming flowers of all shapes and colors. He lay there for a moment before slowly getting to his feet and looking around. It was quiet and peaceful and for a minute he thought that he was all alone there. But then, several yards away, up on a small hill, he saw a woman. She had fancy layered robes in different shades of blue and long dark hair that made him think of his mother. She sat in profile to him, although the way her hair fell made it impossible to see her face, and there was something wrapped in blankets cradled in her arms. Drawn to her like a magnet, he started walking over to the mysterious woman. But when he reached the base of the small hill, he was stopped short. Puzzled, he looked down at himself and spied a chain pale white blue and barely visible coming out of his chest and disappearing down into the ground. The chain was pulled taut so he could go no further. He scowled at the ghostly chain and pulled at it with his hands, determined to unhook himself somehow so that he could reach the strange woman that made him think of his mother. "What are you doing here?" The woman had noticed him and he thought that her face was a lot like his mother's, although she was clearly someone else. "Go back," the woman commanded, looking sad. "You don't belong here." "Not yet." That made him really mad. He hadn't belonged in his mother's village, he hadn't belonged in any of the countless foster homes, and he hadn't really belonged in Konoha. If he didn't belong here, where the heck did he belong? He tugged on the chain harder, determined to stay. "Go back," the woman insisted, her human face starting to waver with hints of fox features flickering in and out of focus. "You're too young. You're much too young to die." He paused, puzzled, and looked around much more closely. The verdant meadow started to flicker, showing flashes of brown dead earth instead of spring flowers. The beautiful fox woman's clothes went from silky and pristine to tattered and faded and back again. The bundle in her arms was a baby, he saw, but it was blue and small and withered and very clearly dead. Fear seeped through the numb quasi-bliss he'd felt since arriving in this place and he shivered. He didn't want to die without seeing his mother again. "Go back, grandson, and live." The tight chain suddenly pulled him down through the dirt and he was falling through the void like a stone. Falling, falling, falling. Naruto jerked and gasped. Everything hurt. He was all hot and sweaty. There was a prickling, burning sensation along the left side of his neck and in his left shoulder and low on his right side. He tried to swallow the queasiness that he felt but his throat was sore and raw. "Guh," he grunted. He tried to see where he was, but he'd either gone blind or he was in a pitch-black room. Feebly groping around, he was about to determine that he was in a bed but that was all. When he tried to sit up he only made himself dizzy, which made his unhappy stomach worse. All he managed to do was roll over to the side of the bed and throw up onto the floor. Immediately came the shame and the dread. He'd very rarely gotten sick as a child, it was usually due to some kind of food poisoning, but when he had been awful. Either the current foster parent would loudly berate him as they cleaned up his mess or they would pull him out of bed and force him to do it. So any minute now, or whenever it was noticed, his current guardian would arrive and one of the two options would happen. Naruto yanked the sheets over his head in preparation. There was a rustling sound and then a lamp clicked on. Naruto shivered and braced himself for the angry complaints. But the worst that he heard was a deep sigh and then the sounds of the wood floor being scrubbed clean. And then the sheet was pulled from over his head, blinding Naruto with the lamp light as a damp rag assaulted his face. "Hehe." Naruto croaked weakly. The person, whoever it was, didn't seem moved by his protests. When the adult was satisfied that Naruto's face was clean, they left only to return with a glass of water in a bowl. Naruto was coaxed into rinsing his mouth out and then drinking the rest of the lukewarm water. "There," the man whose voice Naruto had never heard before said. "Do you feel better now?" "No," Naruto mumbled around chattering teeth. His eyes just weren't adjusting to the light and no matter how Naruto squinted he couldn't see much of the man. His face was either in total shadow or washed out by the light. All he could tell about the man was that he was a complete stranger. Although, there was something oddly familiar about his smell, or part of his smell. If Naruto's head wasn't aching so much he might have puzzled over it more. "Try to get back to sleep," the man said kindly. "You'll feel better soon." Naruto moaned. He doubted he'd feel better soon. If anything, he felt a bit worse than he had when he'd first woken up. He was sure it would be a lot longer than soon before he felt like himself again. "Don't hesitate to speak up if you need anything," the man continued, switching off the lamp. The sudden return to total darkness made Naruto flinch. He wasn't scared of the dark or anything, but he liked just enough light from under the door or cracks in the shades so that he could see his surroundings once his eyes adjusted. But this room was perfectly dark with no light seeping in from anywhere. And this room, and the rest of the house, happened to be wholly unfamiliar to him, which gave the situation an added creepy factor. He didn't hear the man leave. And since he hadn't heard the man open the door when he'd first appeared, it had to mean that the guy had been in the room the whole time. It unnerved Naruto even more. And then he remembered what had happened in the alley with the Uchiha and the silver knife. His right hand slid over the spots on his neck, shoulder, and side where he'd been wounded and felt bandages and gauze. It was proof that it had really happened, that his old nightmare had become real. Naruto cried like a baby. He was sick and hurt in a strange place. Was he even in Konoha anymore, with a strange person hanging around him in the dark, and his nightmare wasn't a nightmare anymore but reality? He'd been attacked just like his grandfather had said would happen if he was found out. Even though he was supposed to be a tough demon-hunting ninja, right now he was just a kid who needed his mother. Naruto. The man was back beside the bed and a hand gently gripped the boy's shoulder. What's wrong? Is something hurting you? The boy cringed at the touch, and then grabbed the guy's arm. He didn't know why he went for a perfect stranger. Perhaps it was that weird déjà vu smell that he had. But Naruto needed some human contact that didn't include pointy, poison-dipped knives. The stranger didn't seem weirded out by Naruto's suddenly clinginess. The man rearranged things so that he was sitting on the edge of the mattress and Naruto ended up in his lap. And while Naruto whimpered and cried, the man ran his fingers through his hair, sort of like one of the things his mother did when he was upset. It didn't last long. Naruto's energy drained very quickly. And the comforting gesture from the stranger washed away fear that kept him awake and upset. Within minutes he was out cold again. Fugaku sat stone still in his cell deep within the Umbu prison. He didn't fidget or pace or mutter to himself. He simply stared at the blank stone wall with his right eye. His left eye was gone. There was a slash along one of his arms and a peppering of fading bruises, but it was superficial. It was nothing next to the destruction of one of his eyes. Somehow, someway the Umbu who dared to put out his eye would pay dearly. His jaw tightened as he recalled the Umbu who had intervened in his disposal of the werewolf child. The man had been fast, incredibly fast. In a handful of seconds the wild Umbu had injured his eye and arm, stabbed Yashiro through the heart when the senior officer had tried to intervene, and outsped Shisui, mauling the young Uchiha's arm and torso to the point that his death seemed likely. And then he tore the child from Tekka's arms while the officer was panicking over the bite the child had inflicted on his hand, vanishing with even greater and more disturbing swiftness. Such speed. Fugaku mused darkly. I couldn't follow it, even if I'd had both my eyes. Only the Hiraishin's speed is beyond my perception, but that's impossible. Only Namikaze could employ that technique. And that Umbu was in the shape of a man, not a beast. No werewolf had ever returned to human shape after being transformed into a beast by moonlight. There were tales that Madara had been able to so do, but everyone knew they were just exaggerations to make him a more terrifying villain. As frightening as the disease-ridden werewolf was, one that could disguise itself as a man once more was worse as it could spread its curse faster and more freely. I must find out who the man behind the wolf mask is, the Uchiha leader decided. He is clearly an obstacle in ridding Konoha of another werewolf. He must be dealt with. He must pay for the blood of my clan that he has spilled, and for my eye. When Naruto woke up again, there was only one thing on his mind: he had to pee really, really bad. He slithered out of bed, and was a bit thrown because it wasn't a bed so much as a mattress laid directly on the wooden floor. He wasn't exactly sure how he managed to stand upright because he was horribly lightheaded and stiff and moving certain ways hurt like hell. But somehow he got vertical, and then he staggered around the still pitch-black room until he found the doorknob. The dimly lit hallway felt too bright to his eyes, but he didn't have time to stop and let them adjust. He shuffled along, feeling like an old man, as he checked every single door with increasing urgency. He really had to pee, and he refused to piss his pants because he couldn't make it to the bathroom. Finally, just as he felt like he was going to burst, he found the bathroom. He didn't even bother to close the door, he didn't have the time to waste. Some fumbling with his clothes and a little wobbling later and he finally found relief. Ah, Naruto sighed and sagged against the bathroom sink after he finished. That was close. Then Naruto noticed that the pajamas he was wearing were not his. He didn't own any plain white t-shirts or blue flannel pants. And he didn't have any clothes that seemed so new. Most of what he owned was well-worn, either hand-me-downs from long-gone foster families or outfits from thrift stores. Half the time he didn't even bother with pajamas, he's just sleep in his shirt and underwear. His tongue brushed against Fang's, and then he noticed his claws, and he wondered if he'd partly shifted in his sleep or if he'd stayed part transformed from when the Uchiha had been after him and he just hadn't noticed the last time he'd been awake. Running his hands over his body, he found pointed ears and a barely sprouted cottontail poking over the top of his pants. The joints in his ankles and feet were also a bit off, which had contributed to his difficulty in making it to the bathroom. Frowning, Naruto set out to fix his appearance to fully human. Ow! He whimpered. It hurt. It hurt more than it had when he'd shaken off the transformation after his Cuba possession episode. And it took 3 times longer for the tiny changes to happen. He especially had trouble getting rid of the claws on his left hand and fixing his right leg. Maybe, it's the silver? He wondered, remembering the wounds on his left shoulder and right hip. Stubbornly Naruto pushed through the pain until he was done, and then he slumped to the cold tile floor and lay on his back. He was exhausted from doing practically nothing. Naruto pouted and wondered if he'd be able to get up again. I wish tile was softer. The creak of footsteps on stairs made Naruto tense up in a flash of anxiety. So he regained consciousness. A muffled female voice asked. Yes, a familiar man's voice replied. He vomited, but afterwards he seemed fairly lucid. He must be doing better for you to have left him alone. The man and woman reached the top of the stairs and the sound of their footsteps changed slightly. They drew closer and closer to where Naruto lay, but stopped short. There was a sharp inhale and a few hurried steps, and then a shadow loomed over Naruto's face. Naruto? The man asked, his voice a bit tight with worry. He was dressed in full Umbu gear, the black, sleeveless bodysuit with the white armor, black gloves, short sword, and white ceramic mask. His was a canine-style mask with black markings painted on it, framed by spiky blonde hair. Naruto was sort of annoyed that he couldn't see the man's face. First it was because of the lamplight and darkness, and now because of his mask. I had to pee, Naruto said sheepishly. Good, your kidneys are working, the woman's voice said from the hallway. Hopefully you haven't reopened any of your wounds. Bring him back to the bedroom, Mangetsu, and I'll check him over. The dog-masked Umbu sighed and gingerly scooped Naruto off the bathroom floor and carried him back to the room he'd woken up in. The lamp was on again, but it didn't seem so awfully bright anymore. As Naruto was carefully put back on the mattress, he noticed the woman Umbu removing cloth taped over a window, which had been why the room had been so dark. She, too, was dressed in full Umbu gear with a medic bag hanging from one shoulder. Her mask was a bird design with some brown accents. Her hair was short and black and it almost looked like a man's hairstyle. Let's take a look at you, she said after she'd finished. The woman removing his shirt and then slowly unwrapped the bandages. She studied the injuries and then cleaned them with some medicinal fluid that smelled funny and stung a bit. After redressing the wounds, she poked and prodded at him and asked a bunch of silly questions. All right, the woman said, sounding satisfied. You're doing much better, Naruto. But you'll need to take it easy. No strenuous activity until I say so. But, Naruto protested, how am I supposed to train for the final phase of the trials? Don't worry about that for now, Mangetsu told him. Just focus on recovering. Naruto pouted. Cheer up. The woman Umbu snorted. You almost died. There's no way you can make Chunin if you're dead. I almost died. Naruto cocked his head. Really? Sure, I felt super crappy, but, really? The silver knife Fugaku used on you was coated with a powerful poison, she informed him as she reorganized her medic bag. With the silver knocking out most of your natural healing talents, that poison almost finished you off. You're lucky that you're young, healthy, and that you heal fast even without your lycanthropic abilities. Naruto shivered. Not only had people tried to kill him, they'd almost succeeded. It made him feel cold and small. You're on the mend now, she continued. The poison has been neutralized and it has metabolized out of your system. Once the lingering effects of silver exposure have worn off and your stab wounds heal over, you'll be as good as new. Okay, Naruto muttered as Mangetsu helped him get the shirt back on. Start him off on bland food until you're sure that he can keep it down and make sure he stays hydrated, the woman said to the other Umbu, and then she walked out of the room. I'll be back tomorrow unless something else comes up. Thank you, Sparrow, Mangetsu said. Naruto tugged at the hem of his shirt as he listened to Sparrow's footsteps retreat into silence as she left the house. So, Naruto, do you feel up to eating? The remaining Umbu asked. I don't know, Naruto mumbled. Do you know what happened to the Uchiha? They are imprisoned pending Hokage-sama's decision on their punishment, Mangetsu told him. You don't have to worry about them. Only Hokage-sama and a select number of Umbu know that you're here. A bit of tension that Naruto hadn't realized he'd been feeling released, and he curled up on his side on the mattress. Oh. Are you tired? Mangetsu asked, sounding a bit concerned. You want to wait for lunch? It's noon. Naruto blinked, glancing towards the now uncovered window. It is, the Umbu nodded. You should really try and eat something. You've been unconscious for several days. Days? Naruto repeated stupidly. That long? Yes, Mangetsu said. How about I make you some eggs? The next full moon is less than a week away and you'll need to get your strength up if you want to go outside then. Okay, the boy grudgingly agreed, still a bit too shaken up to feel really hungry. Why do I need to be stronger for the full moon? Well, the man paused in the bedroom doorway. If you aren't sufficiently healed, transforming with the full moon will not only set back your recovery, but it will hurt. How do you know that? Naruto asked, both curious and suspicious. Personal experience, the Umbu said, and left to go cook up some eggs. Naruto frowned. He rolled onto his back and stared up at the ceiling, his eyes drawn to an old water spot. For a good 5 minutes he puzzled over the masked adult's response. What does he mean, personal experience? The boy huffed in the empty room. He can't mean that he's a werewolf, too, can he? Chapter 30, Broken Fan. Uzumaki Arashi grimaced as he walked into the smoky bar and looked for Konoha's spy. It wasn't hard to find the man. Not only was he fairly noticeable for his long white hair and impressive physical stature, he was flirting shamelessly with the barmaid, a pretty girl less than half his age. I can't believe I have to deal with this idiot. His first meeting with the Konohanin hadn't been too bad. The big oaf had been quiet, guarded, and had appeared fairly competent. But from the second meeting on, Jiraiya turned into a fool, a clown who flirted with anything young, female, and in possession of impressive assets. Arashi's opinion of the man took a steep nosedive from that day forwards, and it only found ways to get lower. He really couldn't believe this man was a favorite of Konoha's Hokage. And it was even harder for him to believe that his father was using him for a desperate but controlled reveal of the Kitsune race instead of just having him killed off to preserve the secret. Really, would anyone miss such an embarrassing buffoon? But what he thought didn't really matter much. He was the youngest of 4 sons, the baby. Only his sister was younger and less respected, being a girl whose indiscretions completely ruined the clan's social standings and all. Whatever, Arashi thought as he ordered a drink and waited for the stupid Konohanin to notice him. At least this errand gets me out of the village for an hour or 2. That's something at least. Uzushiagakuer no Sato always had a bit of a tense atmosphere to it, but lately the sensation of tension had climbed up to 11 on the scale. Several children had gone missing without a trace, and now it seemed doubtful that they'd ever be returned. The clans were beginning to become more introverted, with each clan looking suspiciously at all the others. There were all sorts of whispers, wild rumors, and dark looks being tossed around. 3 factions now stood behind Uzushiagakuer's walls. The largest faction and the only one with real power in the village was headed by the Kurohi and also included the Byakuchi, the Ristokai, the Mayu-Baikao, and the Kurikawa. The second faction was only a faction by virtue of the 2 clans, the Kinomoto and the Akisame, utter obliviousness to the divisions forming within the village. When push came to shove, though, everyone knew they'd jump in with the Kurohi. And the final faction was formed by the Uzumaki, the Hoshitama, and the Furikawa, and they were further divided in 2, with the Uzumaki wanting immediate action and the other 2 clans bordering on inaction. It was a complete mess. Arashi hated it. The dark-haired man grimaced as Jiraiya made grand boasts about his best-selling literature. He couldn't wait to deliver the note that contained more hard-earned intelligence gathered by his older brother, Kenshin, so that he could leave. It was torture watching someone do something that he was forbidden to do. Ever since the Kitsune race had gone into hiding, sexual relationships with humans were forbidden. Kushina had gotten away with it as she was a woman and capable of disappearing into Izashiagaku so that no human would see the telltale sign, there was always one, that the child was half demon. But men who produced Hanyo children were cut no such slack as the human mothers would instantly know something was wrong with the infants that they birthed. Perhaps it was the lure of the forbidden, but Arashi found human women fascinating. There were so many more of them to choose from than there were Kitsune women, and there was no obligation to marry one. In Uzashio he didn't dare have even a casual relationship with a girl for fear that her family would twist his arm into marrying her before he had made up his mind if she was the right one. I really wish I lived somewhere else, Arashi sulked and sipped at his ale. Like happy, sunny Konoha, for example. A big, stable village like that is always happy and pleasant. Sasuke wished that Kakashi had arranged for them to train somewhere outside of Konoha. A pall hung over the Uchiha district. No one left their house unless they absolutely had to. They traveled in groups, eyeing non-Uchiha suspiciously and fearfully spreading rumors. Everyone was on edge. Uchiha Fugaku had not returned. Uchiha Yashiro was confirmed dead. And Uchiha Tekka and Uchiha Shisui's survival was unknown. No one wanted to believe that the clan head had attempted to kill a Konoha genin. It had to be a lie. And if it was somehow true, Fugaku had to have a very good reason. The genin in question had to be dangerous and undocumented Hanyu, a latent werewolf, a shape-shifting demon playing changeling, something. Sasuke had no idea what to think. When he'd returned from the Forest of Death and walked into the crisis of Uchiha attacked by Umbu, he'd been stunned into shocked numbness. Hearing the truth that his brother had brought back from his visit with the Hokage had been worse. A lot about Naruto hadn't added up or made sense, which had bothered Sasuke. But he'd never thought that that made the blonde idiot genuinely dangerous. Nor had he ever imagined that his father had plans for killing Naruto, let alone that he would carry out those plans. Why? His mother had asked his brother that evening. Why would he do that? What reason could he have had? He believed that Naruto was a werewolf, Itachi had replied. That had explained his father's actions somewhat. Sasuke remembered the lesson his father had given him on their shameful ancestor, Madara, and how he had brought the disease of lycanthropy to their continent. It was the Uchiha clan's duty to destroy all werewolves to keep the curse from spreading and to expunge the old stain on their family name. As unbelievable as Naruto being a werewolf was, it sort of made sense. It explained Naruto's match against Kiba. Latent werewolves, those who had yet to transform by the light of the full moon, had minor healing powers, weakness to silver, and they sometimes would transform a bit under severe stress. And perhaps it even explained the strange Kyuubi-connected episode of Naruto's that Sakura had reported. The evil of his curse had somehow made some connection with the evil energies of the giant Kitsune skeleton, or something. But when had Naruto been bitten? It certainly hadn't happened when he'd been in Konoha. If that had happened, it wouldn't have taken very long for everyone to know about it. So Naruto had to have been bitten before he came to the Leaf Village. If Naruto is a werewolf, why is father in jail? Sasuke had asked his brother. One does not simply kill a demon hunter turned werewolf, his brother had explained. Hokage-sama must sanction such an act, and Hokage-sama did not approve of what father has done. Instead, Hokage-sama is treating father's action as an assault against one of his sworn ninja, and he will decide father's punishment accordingly. But why would Hokage-sama protect a werewolf? Sasuke had sputtered, utterly baffled. It is no crime to be afflicted with the werewolf curse, Sasuke, Itachi had told him. It is only a tragedy. If Naruto is deemed to not be an immediate threat, there is no reason to eliminate him. There have been others in the past that have lived months or even years after contracting the curse, and very few of them ever succumbed to it and became dangerous. Between training sessions Sasuke had visited the ninja archives to confirm what Itachi had told him, because it had sounded so ridiculous compared to what he knew of lycanthropy. Most ninja who contracted lycanthropy committed suicide shortly afterwards, but there were a few exceptions who chose to try and live with it. The oldest case recorded shortly after the village's founding was of a senju who had survived for almost 2 decades by remaining secluded indoors during nights of the full moon to avoid being consumed before eventually committing suicide, although one record Sasuke managed to find insinuated that the Uchiha may have assassinated her and made it look like a suicide. Another example that jumped out at him was Hatake Asekumo, who lived for nearly a year before ending his life out of shame over his condition. And the most recent example, if Naruto wasn't counted, was a man named Namikaze Minato who had kept his curse secret for years, no one was entirely sure how long, and actually succumbed from exposure to the full moon, yet he didn't harm anyone and disappeared, his ultimate fate undetermined. Of all the latent werewolves he'd looked at, Namikaze Minato stuck out the most in his mind. Hatake Asekumo came in a close second. In one of the reports on the Jonin that he'd had the clearance to look at, he'd found a picture. The resemblance to Naruto had been uncanny and he'd meant to ask his mother about it. However, when he'd returned home that evening and seen the strain on his mother's face, he hadn't gone through with it. Sasuke had considered asking his older brother, but Namikaze had left the village when his brother had barely been 5 years old, so he wasn't sure if Itachi would know much of anything about him. And with the curse mark on his shoulder, he didn't feel comfortable talking to any of his relatives about anything, let alone shameful Konoha werewolves. "Mom, what do you think the clan will do if they find out about the mark?" They'll disown you, at the least," his mother had reluctantly told him. "But don't you worry about it. We'll figure out some solution." He felt awful for his mother. Over the past few days, it was hard to remember that it had only been days and not weeks. She had barely slept and looked more and more haggard. With father gone, she was slowly bending under the strain of leading the clan without him. Itachi wasn't doing much better. Instead of patrolling the streets of Konoha as a military police officer, he spent most of his time comforting Uchiha clansmen, arguing with the elders, meeting with the Hokage, and trying to help their mother. Sasuke barely saw him and had lost all hope of having his brother give him a training session. "Father, did you really have to do it?" Sasuke wondered as he walked towards the exit of the Uchiha district on his way to his training. "I know the clan has to get rid of werewolves, but couldn't you have waited until it was decided that he was dangerous? Couldn't you have found some other solution?" Sasuke didn't particularly like Naruto. The boy was loud, stupid, had terrible taste in clothing, and was terribly behind them in his ninja skills. It was irritating to have to work with him, and Sasuke was looking forward to getting a new team that didn't include an infatuated girl and a loud-mouthed clown. But he didn't want Naruto to die. Lost in thought, Sasuke accidentally knocked into an older Uchiha. The boy swallowed and started to apologize, cringing when he noticed who it was. Uchiha Setsuna was one of the clan elders, and one of the sternest of all of them. "Setsuna-sama, you need to be more alert," the old man scolded. "Such inattention to your surroundings could lead you to blunder into a demon nest." "I'm sorry, Setsuna-sama," Sasuke gulped, bowing deeply in apology. "I was busy thinking of my training." "Less wandering in thought and more doing," Setsuna barked. "You have a long road ahead of you if you hope to attain the skill and power of Itachi." Sasuke gritted his teeth. As much as he loved his older brother, it grated on him to be constantly compared to him and told to be like him. He felt so lost in Itachi's shadow that sometimes he wondered if some clan members realized that he wasn't just some other young Uchiha but the clan heir's younger brother. "I understand, Setsuna-sama," Sasuke said, bowing again. "I will work harder." "See that you do," the elder grumbled. "The clan needs every strong ninja it has to be ready." The boy was puzzled by the old man's statement, but nodded in agreement anyway and hoped that he would be forgotten soon. "There are many disturbing and ugly rumors floating about," Setsuna continued, clasping a hand to Sasuke's shoulder. "Whispers of Orochimaru interfering in the trials, werewolves within the walls of the village, and Konoha turning against us, the clan most capable of defending the village from such evils. Itachi may be talented, but he is young and too cautious without the guidance of Fugaku. Perhaps, that is what the Hokage is counting on, Itachi's youthful inaction. In any case, we must be prepared for any possibility. Is your shoulder all right, boy?" Throughout the old Uchiha's ramblings, the curse mark started to throb. It did that whenever he got angry, frustrated, or anxious, and Setsuna's paranoid ideas had made him increasingly nervous. Sasuke might have been able to hide his reactions if the old man hadn't been gripping his marked shoulder and hadn't squeezed it more with every sentence. The boy simply hadn't been able to hide his flinches. "It's fine," Sasuke lied as calmly as he could manage. "I may have bruised it a bit yesterday." "Oh, let me see." The man frowned and started to move aside Sasuke's shirt collar. "It's really nothing, Setsuna-sama," Sasuke squeaked, trying to duck away but unable to escape the old man's tight grip. "I need to get going or I'll be late." "That thief can wait," the elder grunted. "He's known for his tardiness." Before Sasuke could rein in his panic and spit out some other excuse, Setsuna uncovered what he was trying to hide. Due to his sudden flare of stress, the curse mark and its encircling seal were probably easily visible. But regardless of whether or not it had appeared on his skin, Setsuna detected it and confirmed it with his Sharingan. "I suppose your mother tried to hide this," the elder said coldly. "I always felt that she persuaded Fugaku to have another child so that she had something to coddle. I need to go train." Sasuke's feeble squeak was cut off by Setsuna taking his elbow in an iron grip and dragging him back towards the heart of the district. "Forget your training," the elder Uchiha snarled. "It's meaningless now. This is vitally important clan business." Itachi grimaced as he was escorted by two Umbu down to the prison cell where his father was locked away. He wasn't visiting for fun or out of affection, but due to obligation. The clan wanted to know how he was doing, and only a face-to-face meeting would satisfy them. And his father was no doubt curious to know what was going on with the rest of the Uchiha. It had taken days for the Hokage to give his permission for this meeting. He didn't envy the old man at all for all the problems he had to be juggling at this moment: Fugaku's treacherous actions, the unrest in the village, securing the village against further visits from Orochimaru, and the trials that were still underway. Itachi felt bad for pestering the village leader for this opportunity, but it had to be done. He was led to an isolated cell that was flanked by two more Umbu. The cell bars had seal papers attached to them, and he was sure that there were seals on his father's body as well, to ensure that the Uchiha leader wouldn't be going anywhere. The man sat stiff and proud in profile, keeping his good side that still had an eye to the bars, facing the wall. "Father," Itachi murmured when Fugaku failed to acknowledge his presence. "Itachi," Fugaku said in reply. "You have news for me." "The clan is upset," the clan heir informed him. "Mother is distraught. The village is uneasy. Are you satisfied? Was the target eliminated?" the clan head asked. "If Naruto had expired, I'm sure that your sentence would have been decided by now," Itachi responded grimly. "Then our sacrifice is in vain," Fugaku muttered bitterly. "The longer it lives, the more likely its healing powers will return and restore its strength." "What a waste." "Indeed," Itachi agreed. "Yashiro is dead and Shisui expired yesterday, all because you wanted to kill a boy who happens to suffer from lycanthropy." It had pained him to learn of Shisui's death. His older cousin had been his best friend, although in recent years they'd begun to grow apart. He'd looked up to Shisui and appreciated his ability to think outside of the Uchiha box. But his injuries had just been too severe, and even if a medical genius like Tsunade had been available he would have survived as a cripple, without any useful function in his dominant arm. "And what of Tekka?" Fugaku inquired grimly. "He was bitten by an untransformed child," Itachi said. "It is common knowledge that werewolves are minimally contagious in human form. And Tekka was otherwise uninjured and his system full of chakra. Even if he had contracted the curse, his body would have easily fought it off before it could permanently take hold. He has more to fear from mundane infection from the bite than anything, and he is getting antibiotics for that." Of course, in spite of this, Itachi had heard that the man had attempted suicide at least once so far, and would probably succeed should he be released from his cell. "The target was Namikaze Minato's spawn, I'm certain of it," Fugaku grunted. "For all we know, its bite could be exponentially more contagious. He needs to be silver tested for a full month until we can be sure that he hasn't contracted the curse." "If that will ease your mind," Itachi agreed. "Although that might not deter Tekka from his choice, he's too proud." "How did Sasuke do?" Fugaku asked. "He passed the Forest of Death section," Itachi informed him. "Both the team survival test and the individual preliminary tournament." "Very good," The clan head nodded, a hint of pleasure creeping into his tone. Spare whatever time you can to train him. Itachi forced back a grimace. His father wanted Sasuke's performance in the arena to be excellent to remind the world of the Uchiha's power and to emphasize that to the village. He wanted Sasuke's fight to be a statement, no doubt. If I am able to, Itachi replied. Trying to manage the unrest your actions have caused take up all of my time. Delegate clan management to cousin Izuna, Fugaku instructed. I trust his judgment. He will know what must be done. Focus on Sasuke. Hatake cannot be trusted, especially now. Itachi made no reply. He thoroughly disagreed with his father's thoughts. And he had no intention of delegating to the Uchiha of his father's choice. Izuna had already tried to influence Itachi's policy of dealing the clan and he didn't like what his adult cousin thought should be done. Tell your mother to be strong, the clan leader continued. As the target is unlikely to die by this point, I will be eventually released probably when the Hokage has recovered from the embarrassment of the Uchiha uncovering a werewolf that he either didn't notice, or willfully hid from the village. Make sure that Sasuke does his best. The clan heir knew a dismissal when he heard it and didn't waste any time in leaving. Farewell, father. Itachi clenched his teeth as his two Umbu escorts led him out of the prison and back to the fringes of the village. As a child, he had once looked up to his father with a reverence almost as strong as Sasuke's. But as he'd grown and met and worked with other ninjas, his view of the world had widened beyond the Uchiha-centric lines that he'd been raised to think in. He still greatly respected his father's skill and experience, but his arrogance and stubbornness wore on him. And now it was biting the clan in its collective behind. To bleed off his frustration, Itachi took the long way home. He walked part of his usual patrol and admired the fine weather. He almost stopped at a snack stand to feed his sweet tooth, but decided that he should head home and talk with his mother. The strain that she was suffering from due to Fugaku's imprisonment and Sasuke's curse mark made him worried. I wish mother had more friends outside of the clan. He tilted his head thoughtfully as he walked under the archway that signified the border between the Uchiha district and the rest of the village. I wonder what happened to that red-haired Kunoichi she used to have lunch with sometimes. She was funny. When Itachi reached his home, he wished that he'd hurried. The clan elders, headed by Setsuna, were gathered in front of the house. His mother was trying not to cry, and Sasuke was as white as a sheet. It was painfully clear what was going on. Before he had learned of his father's mistake, he'd hoped that he would have time to find an apartment outside of the clan district so that Sasuke could move in with him and avoid being scrutinized by the rest of the Uchiha. After his father had disgraced himself, Itachi had hoped to talk his mother into moving out or setting up an apartment for Sasuke alone because he couldn't leave the district and keep the Uchiha in line at the same time. But now the choice was taken out of his hands. He'd known that the curse mark would come to the clan's attention eventually, he'd just hoped that it would take longer. Come Sasuke, I'll walk you to practice, Itachi sighed. He flashed the elders a cold look. And when I return, we'll talk. Sarutobi Hiruzen dearly wished that he could take some time off for a nap. But just about everything that could go wrong except Naruto throwing a fit over being placed in his father's custody had gone wrong, and a few things he hadn't anticipated, too. And as he was trying to enjoy an early lunch with his wife, yet another thing decided to go wrong. Hokage-sama, Anumbu murmured apologetically, peeking in the window. The Uchiha have discovered Sasuke's curse mark, disowned, and exiled him. Alert Kakashi and tell him to clean off his couch, the old man sighed. The masked ninja gave a sharp nod and vanished. That poor boy, Biawao sighed. Perhaps we ought to invite him to live with us. If he stays with Kakashi the Uchiha might get more insulted. Now that he's disowned, they should no longer care as he isn't one of them anymore, the Hokage sighed and sipped at his tea. And isn't Konohamaru enough for you? Maybe Konohamaru will calm down more with an older brother figure in the house, his wife replied. And it would be an interesting challenge to break him of his narrow-minded Uchiha-centric view. We need more Uchiha who can think about the world beyond their clan. I can't argue with that, the old man smiled thinly. Invite him if you want, but I don't see him agreeing. You never know, Biawao responded, worrying her husband a bit that she might try to bully the boy into it. So, how goes your attempts to drive the fox out of the henhouse? Not well, Hiruzen grimaced and stirred at the remains of his rice. Koshoku shows no interest in leaving on his own after I politely suggested it. It was very unfortunate timing for him to have discovered his tale on that morning, so we have no proof that it was him spreading those rumors so quickly about that incident. I'd have him escorted out forcibly if it wouldn't clue in the leaders of Uzushiagakuer that I am highly suspicious of them. If only we could just assassinate him, Biawao complained. That would lead to war sooner rather than later, dear, Hiruzen frowned. I know, she sighed irritably. It would make things simpler in the short term, one less problem to worry you, but we have to think in the long term. The Hokage reached across the table and took his wife's hand. Whatever else decides to go wrong, I'm sure that I'll find some way through it so long as I have you around to keep me sane. You and your cheesy lines, Hiruzen. Biawao grumbled, although she was smiling. The old leader chuckled. At least things aren't so grim that I can't get Biawao-chan to smile. Umino Iruka really didn't know how he'd held it together when he'd taught his younger students. As it was, he hadn't gotten through half of the lesson that he'd planned, partly out of his distraction and partly because the wild rumors running through the village had his students rowdy and full of whispers. But classes were out for the day and he had a personal mission to accomplish. When Naruto hadn't returned from the Forest of Death by dinner time, Iruka had gone out to look for him. It hadn't taken him long then to uncover the storm of wildly multiplying rumors that had terrified him. He'd gone to find Hatake Kakashi, hoping that the Jounin's higher-level connections could shed some light on the situation, and been horrified. The Uchiha clan had determined that Naruto was a werewolf and had tried to kill him. Umbu had interrupted them and rescued him. Naruto was receiving medical attention in a secure location. The offending Uchiha were either dead or incarcerated in an Umbu prison. And that was it. Iruka checked in with Kakashi every day, but the Jounin never had anything new to tell him. The silver-haired ninja didn't know what Umbu was assigned to guard Naruto or where the boy was being kept. All he could say was that Naruto wasn't dead yet. That just wasn't enough for Iruka. He was supposed to be the boy's guardian and was responsible for his welfare. He'd had a bit of trouble when Naruto's lycanthropic nature had come to light, but after seeing that it hadn't changed the boy any, he was still class clown Naruto. He'd done his best to treat him normally. It wasn't Naruto's fault that his father was a werewolf, which had led to the boy becoming a werewolf too. And if Hokage-sama didn't have a problem with the boy's curse, Iruka would find a way to deal with it as well. I need to know if he's alright, Iruka thought as he walked to the Hokage tower. I need to know who's watching him. I'd like to see him if I'm allowed, bring him his clothes, and if he's not badly injured I could bring him some reading material to further his studies. He'd been reluctant to bother the Hokage, as worried as he was about Naruto, because he knew that the village leader would be very busy with all sorts of problems in addition to the usual stress of the trials. But he just couldn't sit by and wait for Kakashi to uncover something of substance, or for someone to decide that he deserved to be informed of Naruto's condition. So he'd just stop the Hokage's office and respectfully request further information. Iruka considered himself lucky that he didn't have long to wait between speaking with the Hokage's secretary and being granted entry to the village leader's office. The Chunin tried not to be nervous, but the weary look on the Hokage's face made him worry that his request would be denied. Naruto's well-being was important to him, though, so he steeled his nerves and made his request. I'm terribly sorry to bother you, Hokage-sama, but I was wondering if... Hey, wait. The secretary yelped from beyond the door. You need to wait your turn. The office door creaked open and a red-headed kunoichi with blue-gray eyes poked her head in. Hi, Hokage-sama. She chirped. You're not too busy right now, are you? I'd like to drop a scroll off real quick. Iruka blinked. Who is that? I was talking to one of my Chunin, the Hokage sternly informed her, but you may put this scroll of yours on my desk and wait until we are finished. There are a few things I'd like to discuss with you before you run off. All right, she agreed and slipped into the office, ignoring the annoyance of the secretary. Her hair was very red and very long, hanging straight down her back. She was dressed almost entirely in black with only a reddish obi belt to break up the black of her pants and kimono-style shirt. There was a dusty pack slung over her shoulder from which she extracted a large, formal-looking scroll. This is from my father, the kunoichi said. I'm sure that you already know a lot of what's in it, but he felt it was important to formally deliver the information by hand. I can't say I can complain, it got me back here. Indeed it did, Kushina, the Hokage nodded. Hopefully you can help me drive out a pest from your village while you're here. Her village? Iruka frowned. She's a foreign ninja? How can she get away with such casual conversation with Hokage-sama? That Byakucha weasel? Sure, she grinned. And there'll be time in there somewhere for Naruto, right? Of course, the old man smiled kindly. I'll make arrangements for you to see your son very soon. Iruka twitched. What? That's it for part 10. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.